This is the one nightmare you absolutely don't want to encounter when writing a piece of music. It's caused composers and songwriters of every description to tear their hair out at some point in their career. A friend to the Polish composer Chopin once wrote that this problem was so bad for him that he'd weep with frustration. It's persisted throughout the centuries, crossing continents and affecting beginners and experts alike. Some will testify that it is the most painful thing to overcome in the pursuit of writing excellent music. It's not the initial idea itself, or the hook, or the ending, or the spark, or the production, or the effects, but it is something that can make or break your music. The problem I'm going to be discussing in this series is the art of the musical transition. Here's a scenario. You've thought of a really good idea. You've played around with it a little bit on an instrument or on some music software. You've shown it to some friends and they've told you it's good. Then you begin fleshing out the idea, and in the course of your experimentation, you stumble across another really good idea. You think, this is going to make the music even better. It seems like whatever you're writing was meant to be. Only, when you listen to them one after the other, you realize that something's not quite working, and for some reason these two things just don't complement each other. So anyway, you listen to these two things and you think, wow, this sucks. I'm a bit of a loser for doing this. Christ, how did I let this happen?
I can't believe you've done this.
So the problem being caused here is pretty straightforward. Hearing these two ideas next to each other is so jarring that it's actually lifting the listener out of the music because they're now focusing on how the parts are fighting each other. In an instant, your music sounds clumsy and amateurish. Something has to be done. To fix this, the type of skill required is not really within everyone's grasp. In fact, this is often what separates the really good writers from everyone else. The ability to write a seamless transition that allows one part to melt into the other. But let's start with something that most musicians should be able to do. For this video, the particular transition under discussion is what I'm lazily going to call the bringing it all back home quickly transition. This is where the writer has already taken us on a bit of a musical journey and wants to get back to earlier material without losing too much time. The two examples of this we're going to look at are 1. The song Pretty Noose, released by the Seattle band Soundgarden in 1996, and 2. The Firebird, written for orchestra by Igor Stravinsky and premiered in 1910. I'm choosing these two examples because they use a very similar solution to the same problem in a way that's both efficient and satisfying. Then afterwards, I'm going to look at 2 other bits of music that try to do the same thing but fail spectacularly. Let's start with Stravinsky. In the opening seconds of The Firebird, the strings repeat an ominous opening theme. Let's give it a listen. So at this point, the music goes on a bit of a journey, as Stravinsky experiments with this theme, having it play by different instruments in various keys. Over a minute or so, things become slightly more energetic. It feels like something big has been worked towards. But Stravinsky doesn't want the music to get ahead of itself and decides to rein it back for just a second before pushing forward. And he does this by returning to the opening theme we just heard. But since the opening was quieter and slower, it can't immediately be returned to. Stravinsky doesn't want to spend 30 seconds slowing things down because it would throw away the sense of forward momentum that he spent so long trying to create. He needs a momentary reprieve, and he needs it now. So let's hear how he goes about doing that. So right at the end there, you will have heard the transition composed of 2 chords. What? That's it? 2 chords? Well yes, that's exactly it. It took 2 incredibly well-chosen chords to bring us back to where we started. Obviously this was all set up by the preceding music, but still, the effect is so seamless that it doesn't even sound like there was a problem to be solved in the first place. If you think this is all bluster, listen to how it would have sounded if Stravinsky had left out those 2 chords. Now your first impression might be, that wasn't so bad. Maybe you even thought it was an improvement. And that's okay. It's okay to be wrong. But let's move on to the next example. In the case of Soundgarden, they also have an introduction that they want to get back to. Let's hear the introduction. Now we're dealing with standard verse-chorus structure here, but Soundgarden are obviously seeking to avoid predictability by firstly repeating the chorus line 3 times rather than 4, and returning to a quick restatement of the opening before continuing on with the second verse. However, just like Stravinsky, they only want to touch on the intro briefly without losing too much momentum, and they achieve this in the same way, by using 2 really well chosen chords. See how well that works? They've managed to zip us through all the previously established material in a few seconds, and it's seamless. And this kind of detail is important. It's a way of taking the listener's hand and directing their attention where you want it to go. The majority of bands, professional or otherwise, take a kind of cookie-cutter approach to assembling music, often just repeating a chorus line 4 times and then linking straight back to the verse without thinking about it. Untrained listeners can often tell when something clumsy has happened, even if they don't quite realise why. And if you're going to simply place blocks of music side by side without examining how they interact with each other, you're probably going to get sniffed out. In the wrong hands, here's how that Soundgarden example would have sounded. So this doesn't really require any further comment. But there is something else that should be mentioned at this point. This type of transition isn't automatically a good thing, and is only appropriate where necessary, when there are 2 parts being linked up that clearly don't work together. And here's the important point, that your intention is that they work together. I say that because some composers seek to create a different kind of meaning by intentionally juxtaposing sections of music that grind up against each other. And there are so many examples of this being done to great effect, that I could create another video 3 times the length of this one going into it. So I thought it would be fun to give 2 examples of musical transitions that to my ears really don't work. The first one I'm going to deal with has dogged me ever since I was a kid. It's an inescapable song that every single person on the planet knows by heart.
Now I had the time of my life. No, I never.
Yeah, that one. Now what I find particularly funny about this example is that everyone knows the bit I'm about to point out, but whenever I do, I usually get a reaction like, oh yeah, that's terrible. I'm so used to this song that I never gave that bit a moment's thought. So what bit in particular? Just after the big sax solo. Itself a glistening example of 80s cheese. The writers, yeah, more than one, want to calm things down for just a second by returning to the intro we just heard. Sound familiar? Before leaping into the final chorus for one last hurrah. And they decide to go about it like this. Sweet Jesus. On paper this idea makes sense. Build up to a loud crescendo and then take it all the way down for the last hurrah. But rather than take the listener's hand and elegantly guide them to the finale, this transition goes, hey, look at me, I'm a random brass section arpeggiating a bunch of clumsy sounding chords. For a song that's otherwise well written, how did this not end up in the bin? Is this bit a symptom of creative tension between John DeNicola and Donald Markowitz? Do you think it was discussed by the panel that awarded them the Oscar for Best Original Song? How did they manage to beat Bob Seger's Shakedown?
It's a given LA law. Someone's faster on the draw. No matter where you hide, I'm coming after you.
For one last example, we're going to look quickly at number 21 in Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. Now, when I told one of my friends that I was doing this, he immediately came up with this example, a transition that ruins an otherwise fairly decent song. This one is even more gratuitous than the last, and on top of that, it's also completely pointless, because it doesn't actually link to anything. This one doesn't require a setup, let's just jump in. Everyday men don't need to think through their transitions. They just need to get to where they're going. On their gilded suicide machines or whatever that stupid lyric is.
Born to Run. He didn't stop there.
Okay, thanks very much for watching. This is a new format for me, so I'm not exactly certain what I'm going to be covering in the future. If you have any suggestions, please just say them. Let me know. I could be more descriptive, I could be less descriptive, I could go more into theory, I could not. Anyway, let me know, thanks. Oh, and subscribing is pretty useful for me, if you wouldn't mind doing that. This video was meant to be about all kinds of different musical transitions, but after a while I realised I was only going to deal with one. If you'd like me to continue talking about different ones, I have more detailed ones I was going to describe. I can do that in the second video. Thanks again, and take care.